Okay, just want to go over the DC wiring. It's already a rat's nest. It's going to get worse, but before it does, I just want to kind of go over the basics here for anyone getting started. Obviously, you've got your positive and negative. For me, I haven't tightened down anything yet, but they're right here, and they come from the roof. Actually, they go through the disconnect box on the outside of the shed. It's just positive and negative, and they come up these two lines here from the panels. Your negative is pretty simple. That's just going to go straight up to PV negative in your charge controller. Your positive, now theoretically you could just go right to the PV positive in your charge controller as well, but that would bypass the breakers, and the breakers are important for safety and for overcurrent potential. So your positive lead only is the only lead that ever goes through a breaker or a fuse. So here's my positive. It's going through a 30 amp DIN rail mounted breaker. It goes up and then continues on, and then, whoops, I'm on the wrong one. It's this one back here. So this is the PV. It's so tight in here. PV positive from the panels goes up, continues on, and to our PV positive in the charge controller. Out from the charge controller, they got to go to the batteries. Now, theoretically, again, you could just go from battery negative and battery positive and go straight to the positive negative of your battery bank. But again, you gotta run these through breakers for safety and code. So the negative, again, never goes through a breaker. That is just going to go straight down to the negative terminal of my battery bank, or to a negative bus bar, or in my case, to the negative side of the shunt. You can think of this, everything on here is the negative on the battery, because this side will be connected to the battery. Shunt's only here for the ability to monitor amps, watts coming in, out, battery capacity, all of those things you're going to want to know with an off-grid system. Then from our battery positive from the charge controller, again, you could go right to the positive of the battery bank, but you got to go through a breaker. So the positive line's going to go through a breaker. In my case, it's the 60 amp breaker right here. And here it is. It's going to go through this breaker and up and on to the positive of the battery. Everything up here is think of as the positive of the battery bank. This is the top end of a 150 amp breaker. Also, it's a disconnect, so you can disconnect your battery bank and your components to work on it. So that's how that works. One other quick thing on the breakers. They're a little confusing because these breakers have a positive, and as you know, it's only positive that goes in a breaker, but it marks it as a positive and a negative at the top. And really all that means is, by positive, they just want you to take the line that has the greatest potential for overcurrent to go through the positive side of it. And then through the negative side of the breaker, even though it's all positive, would be the side that wouldn't have the potential for an overcurrent. So with the solar panels, the between it and the charge controller, the overcurrent potential is greatest from the solar panels. That's why it goes through the positive of the breaker, and then the negative continues on, even though it's all positive. Make it confusing. And then between the charge controller, the battery positive, between the controller and the battery bank, the charge controller would have the greater potential for an overcurrent. So we're going to take the positive of the battery lead, the positive battery lead, and we're going to go first through the positive side of the breaker, and then continue on from the top of the breaker, what they call the negative side of it, and onto the battery, the positive of the battery. So that's the wiring, the DC wiring for the charge controller and the PV panels. Then you've got your inverter. This is the Outback, you can see it, the VFX3524. This is not the grid time model. This is strictly off-grid. This is going to have positive and a negative that go to the battery bank. Negative would go directly to the negative terminal of the battery bank, or in my case, the negative side of the shunt. Again, so it can measure and monitor the what's coming off the battery banks, what I'm using. The positive lead from the inverter is going to go, theoretically you could also go right to the positive of the battery bank, but you got to go through a breaker. So you want a breaker between every major component. So between the inverter and the batteries, we're going to have it go through a breaker, and here it is. This is it. It's going here to the top of the battery bank, but this is a breaker. This is a 150 amp breaker. So it's going to go in, or 250 amp, I'm sorry, 250 amp breaker. So it's going to go here, and then this would be the positive to the battery. And that would protect it from an overcurrent that way. And then that is it. Then I have just my ground leads. Every equipment has a ground lug on it. Where is it here? Oh, it's right here. This has got one. The inverter's got one. Even on my disconnect box, anything, everything that's got metal or it's a component should have a ground lug on it for grounding protection. So this this ground copper wire goes through and it hits up to my ground bus bar. Same with the lug, the battery, the equipment ground lug on the charge controller. It goes also through into the ground bus bar. Now this ground bus bar will then, I'll have one going from it all the way to the ground stake. And then what else? A couple other little things I left out. This is a ground protection breaker for ground fault protection. This breaker has a green and a white lead. The white, or the top of it, goes to the negative on the battery bank, or in this case my shunt, and the green goes to the bus bar, the ground bus bar. And I believe that's it. I think I've covered the DC. Only other little things here is this is the battery temperature sensor. It will connect. Where's the other end of it? Down here. You basically set these on your battery. So it'll measure the temperature of the battery, and it'll regulate the charge to the battery, also based on the temperature of the battery. The inverter has one too. This one here plugs in up there, and I've got it down here. Probably, I don't know if I need them both, but they came with it, so I figure there's no harm in having them both. So that's just a little bit more progress here. I'm just making the conduit run here. Over there, it's the DC positive negative from solar panels through the disconnect box on the other side. Comes in, goes up into here, and then coming back out of here is going to be the AC wires plus the trimetric sensing wires, which will go on there. I got to put this all back together again, but anyway. Then what I'm going to do is, also in this conduit run is that continuous ground right from the solar panels through the equipment ground lug on the disconnect box, and it just continues on through here. I'm going to have this go out its own hole here, and that'll be buried in the trench until it gets to the front panel, where actually this is going to terminate at a ground stake on the DC side. Then what else? What else? All the equipment ground lugs and everything else that grounds onto this ground bus bar, it is bonded to this. I wasn't going to run two separate ones. I bonded it down in there. So it's this is just the continuous run of the copper ground. And on the other side, you'll see what's going to go on here. Here is where our AC wires and our trimetric wires are going to go down into a trench all the way back. The copper ground, oh no, I'm sorry, the copper ground is going to come out of here by itself, go down a conduit, and that I'm just going to keep buried in the trench and have it terminate at a ground rod. A new one I'm going to drive in. Well, I'm not going to drive it in. I'm going to rent an excavator to dig it, the trench and everything else. So that'll terminate there. But I'll go over it again later. I'm far from set up, but I just did a temporary, ran the leads in, and it is working. I was bringing in 100 volts earlier. Now I'm not bringing in much at all, about 100 watts. It's working. The inverter's powered on, although I really won't be able to test that.